Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us today. My name is Kevin Mayhem. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Jensen, and we are very excited that you're joining us for this next session of our educational series of How Do You MiYO? This time, our perspective is from a dentist's perspective. So we are very excited to have Dr. John Sorensen join us today. Doctor, welcome, and thank you for spending some time with us, and Don Cornell. I'm going to be honest, Doctor, I was trying to find a succinct way to share with our friends online all of the things that you've done in your career, and that is a lengthy thing because you've been a very busy guy. But most recently, you're the professor in the Department of Restorative Dentistry at the University of Washington in the graduate Prosthodontics program, also at UW. But I also see that you're director of B4T, which is, I love that name, right? Because there's a meaning to it, B4T, which is a research laboratory at the University of Washington that focuses on material and techniques of restorative dentistry. So that's very interesting. And I know you've got great insight into material, not only the design of it, but the testing and its probability in the mouth and its success in dentistry. So I think you bring great credentials. In addition to being at the university, I know you also were at OHSU, which is Oregon Health Sciences University, and you even owned your own private prosthodontic practice for 7 years. So in addition to that, you're a diplomat on the American Board of Prosthodontics. And what I thought was of particular interest was 3 of your works have been cited as one of the 100 most cited prosthodontic publications in the last 7 decades, in the last 70 years, which is very, very impressive. So we're very excited to have you bring your insights to MiYO this morning. And Don, thank you for joining us. I think most of you know Don. He is equally as popular in the dental industry on the lab side, especially. Not only having owned your lab, I won't date you, Don, but I know it's been a number of decades. We've owned a very successful and high-end laboratory around the country, most recently in Connecticut, but also was the owner and publisher of a media called Teamwork, Dental Dialogue, Teamwork Media, which is a very, very successful and very missed publication in the dental industry. You did a wonderful job running that as well. But I would tell you one of the greatest insights Don brings to us today is his insights into material, the design of that material, and the development of that material. And I think that's where this is going to get really exciting because you've got a clinical perspective and we have a laboratory perspective. So I'm going to stop talking now and let you two have some fun and look forward to hearing what you have to say. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, it's John, we've known each other for a long time. And, to listen to Kevin, I didn't know all those things about you. Listening to Kevin describe as long as we've known each other and everything else, I think we take for granted some of the things that, the other is doing. But we certainly have always been a huge fan. From my perspective, one of the most honest and level-headed and clear-eyed individuals in the dental profession, and I know we've had a lot of relationships with a lot of different companies over the years, but you have found a way to navigate those in the most honest way possible, and I've always had tremendous respect for that, on the professional side. So, it's I really appreciate you being here today, and as Kevin said, bringing a perspective to our discussion that's unique and interesting. And I know when we talk about materials are often driven by not just innovation around them, but by the trends in dentistry themselves. So I know a large part of our discussion today will be around MiYO, but I think it's hard to have the discussion around MiYO without having a discussion around Monolithic and kind of where that's headed and what's brought that to where it is today and kind of where it might go tomorrow. So I know we have a limited time together, but I think those two kind of go hand in hand. And when people ask me, where did MiYO come from? I said, well, you don't have to look any further than the trend in monolithic, and to kind of answer that question. So what was your first experience with MiYO? I know the story, but I think people that are with us today would like to hear that. It's kind of a funny story.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Don, I have to say, I really valued our friendship over the years, really respected you. I think I've had you on 2 American College of Prosthodontists programs. Maybe one of the reasons I have the top 100 references over so long is that I'm getting so old here, but it's been a real honor working with you. And I really respect, again, that Teamwork was a fantastic publication, and all of your work in terms of developing this MiYO product and some of the other really brilliant concepts that you've come up with that are probably a little different than most technicians and doctors would accept. But I think if I remember correctly, you were, I ran into Kevin at an oral design meeting, and then he kind of reconnected us, and he goes, wait, we've got this great material. I connected with you, and you were telling me about these properties of this new material. And to be honest, I was a little skeptical. I guess I'm from the show me state. And it sounded like a fantastic concept. And I work a lot with, I'm director of research for the Graduate Prosthodontics program here at the University of Washington. And I work in the clinic with the residents on Mondays. And we had a big Zirconia case supported by implants that we were doing with one of our residents. And, I was able to convince you and James to come out to the University of Washington and work with us. And so, we were working in the lab and kind of refining the Zirconia framework that you had fabricated from the provisionals we developed. And I don't know if Stacy, you could pull up that first picture. So this is down in, it's called B4T. So it's biomimetics, biomaterials, biophotonics, and biomechanics and technology laboratory. And you can see we've got traditional porcelain ovens that we were working with down there. And we had been looking at the patient, and we're down working. And I think it was Tuesday afternoon, and it's about 6:30. And Stacy, if we could have the next slide, please. So it's about 6:30, and we're going to go out for sushi. And James has applied the MiYO on these only 2 of the units. And, I used to do all my own porcelain work. And, the rule was once you started, you didn't leave until you were finished because, God help you if the material dries out. And so I'm going, James, don't you have to finish this? And he goes, well, don't worry about that. It'll be okay. I'll show you tomorrow. So then we come back in at 8:30 the next morning. If we can have the next picture there, Stacy. And James is showing me the bridge. He picks it up, and if we can go to the next close-up picture, please. And I'm going, damn, look at this. It looks exactly like it was at 6:30 the day before. And so I said, all right, so, Don's not full of it here. And we've got something that appears to be really remarkable. And for people that haven't seen this material much yet, one of the tremendous things about it, tremendous properties, is what you see is what you get. And it's simply remarkable that in 100, 200, 300 microns, you can build layers of color on top of each other. And then with the structure material that gets fired on top of that, you can get incredible surface texture. And that has been one of the tremendous problems. So we had it with Dicor long ago when I was at UCLA, where you would develop a surface texture, But then once you had to get a significant thickness of the stain or coloring on there, it basically obliterated all of the surface texture. And we all know, okay, you know, form, color, shade, translucency, but surface texture is very critical to making it look like a natural restoration. And that's also, besides the ability to achieve this appearance of 1.5 millimeters depth of veneering porcelain, also the ability to get a very natural surface texture. So I think that's really a very remarkable property of this material. And I'm going to say, don't let it go to your head, but I'm going to say probably, you know, one of the 2 or 3 greatest developments in dental ceramics in the last decade has been this product of the MiYO. And your timing was really good. And we can talk a little bit about that in just a minute, but you couldn't have better timing with the rise of the popularity, and I think logically so, of monolithic zirconia. So we had, you know, it was a big part of the success of growing this was the Glidewell company. I think in about 2014, they, on their graph, we had the sales of non-metallic restorations surpassing porcelain fused to metal restorations. And within that year, they were producing about 25,000 units a month, which is remarkable, you know. And I think the success, you know, and there's lots of other brands, but this kind of signified with the very prominent place that Glidewell has in the dental profession. I think it was a great demonstration of the security that clinicians now have with zirconia restorations. You know, and you know, there are different applications of different materials, but for, you know, standard crowns, fixed partial dentures, I think the zirconia has been very much embraced, and clinicians feel very comfortable working with it. The problem is that it was pretty opaque-ish looking, not very lifelike. I started working with the lava material about 2 years before it came to the United States in about 97, 98, and at least the material was shaded. And so there's been a lot of development by the different companies to develop more translucent materials. But I think a significant advantage of the MiYO is that we can work with a 3Y zirconia material that's, let's say, 1,200 megapascals, and yet with this material we can still achieve this beautiful appearance of vitality, translucency, natural shading, and be able to, especially in the anterior, be able to build in all these natural effects. So I was, maybe you could explain to us, Don, a little bit about how you kind of came up with this concept and then how you implemented it. I know that I have worked also with, had worked with Chemical for many years doing blind materials testing, because they were private labeling for a lot of material, but they had some, I think, very bright ceramic scientists there. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got this idea, this brilliant idea, and how you developed that into this product with your scientists at Jensen.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I'd be happy to do that. One thing before we go down that road, though, John, is you mentioned that James and I were there for about a week, and just so people understand what we were doing there, you showed a picture of the full upper arch case that James was working on. There was also, and I think it's even maybe more interesting, the 2-3 unit bridge upper anterior 6 to 11 that we did on the young gal who was a patient there. What was fun about that, and kind of speaks directly to what you were just talking about, was how many bridges did we make out of that? We made
we made 5. 5 sets of
5 sets.
identical frameworks. Yes.
So we had like
different
3Y,
zirconia
5Y, a 4Y. I mean, we had a lot of different opacity type zirconias that we MiYO'd. So we used the same design file and we just output it in different zirconias and then treated the MiYO application in basically the same way to try to achieve the same shade. So you evaluated all those chairside. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, it was kind of a really interesting experience. So we were working with Armand Bedrosian, one of our graduate prosthodontics residents who's now practicing in San Francisco. And for this patient, Aaliyah, she had a lot of discoloration of her teeth, hypocalcification, all sorts of brown spots and so on in her teeth. And she had congenitally missing lateral incisors. And we had to, we couldn't just make perfect teeth for this. We had to have a lot of characterization for her to make it look natural, but, you know, still make the restorations look clean. And so this was, I think, a ideal challenge here to work with the material. What I was struck with is, you know, we were using monolithic restorations, and we, unfortunately, with this format, we don't have time for a whole bunch of pictures. But what was really interesting is I'm looking at the lingual aspect of these, and they're white, right?
Yeah.
They're white. And then you look at the facial, and you would never believe that you could get that kind of natural appearance on there. And so we worked with a number of materials, and actually all 5 sets were absolutely gorgeous. I mean, we were being really, really nitpicky where we went from 5, and we got the input from Armand Bedrosian, from me, but we were trying to leave it up to the patient. And we photo documented all this, and we're going to write an article with you on this. Ultimately, when we got down to the last 2, it was really hard to distinguish between one from another. So I think that was indicative of the kind of universal application of the MiYO material on these 5 different brands and opacities, translucencies of these different materials, where they just look really remarkable. So you made me a believer from that 9-unit zirconia bridge, but this now I'm on the march, very definitely endorsing this. And again, you know, if you look at where these challenges that we have in dentistry with the pandemic now and so on, I think your material becomes even more applicable in terms of taking an average technician, but with the remarkable properties of the material, we can really make nice looking anterior restorations. You know, posterior, monolithic, the anatomy, you know, some gradient, that's a no-brainer. We've got that down. The real challenge, as always, is working in the aesthetic zone, and this really enables I think any technician, even at the beginner levels, with some work with this, you know, and you have to master all materials, but I think this really elevates what dental technicians can do for us, and is especially applicable to the full arch monolithic zirconia restorations, where you know, a lot of the technicians are getting beautiful results with monolithic, but they do micro layering, and they almost always do pink powdered porcelain buildup for the base part of the restoration. And we just haven't been able to get to good aesthetics with that. And so that, I think that the MiYO pink is huge in terms of really, really simplifying that process as well for it.
So, yeah, I went down the road of the multiple zirconias, John, because that's a question that pops up a lot of times. You know, people think that when they see it, some of the beautiful work that James has done in a Jensen ad, for example, and some of the inserts that have been in LMT, for example. I mean, the cases are extraordinary. The photographs are extraordinary. People assume, it's done on high translucency zirconias, but in point of fact, I mean, in most cases, especially in those hybrid cases, that's not even an option, let alone a preferred mode of going. So I think, the question always comes up, what kind of zirconia should I use? And I think the answer is that's really dictated by the case itself, and the requirements of the case. But I'll be honest. I mean, I think in the case you just described, I think we ended up with a 4Y, which was a really nice medium material. I generally steer very clear of high translucency zirconias. I find them too low in value and too difficult to deal with, and they're they're not very sound in terms of physical properties. So I venture more into the 4Y, 3Y area, and I think that actually plays well into our hands. You mentioned, though, that there is a learning curve with everything, and as you know, being a ceramist yourself, I mean, I think every technician understands that. The beauty of MiYO, and you mentioned what you see is what you get, is that aspect of it really shortens the learning curve. When you're doing layer materials, you put your ceramic on, and it takes years of experience to realize, if I put this here and I put that on top of it, I've got a good chance it's going to come out looking something like this. And
maybe, yeah,
maybe. And with MiYO, you know that, I mean, before you put it in the oven, if you're happy with it going in, that's what you're going to get coming out. And that's huge, especially from the learning aspect, because if you're a laboratory owner, or you're somebody who's training somebody and teaching somebody to, a certain skill, it's from a just efficiency point of view, you can look at something that somebody's about to put in the oven and say, change this or change that. Whereas in the old days with layered material, you had to wait for it to come out of the oven to realize it wasn't something that was going to go to the oven. It had to be stripped and started over again.
And by the way, I don't think we can overstate the importance of that, because as we all know, the number of laboratories is going down, people getting in there, and younger people taking that as a career. And I just think that, as you're saying, is just a tremendous advantage. Is what I see when I build up on there, and what it goes into the oven it's I mean, you have to see it to believe it, but it's true. What you see when it goes in is what you get when it comes out of the oven after the firing process.
I know it's. I'm looking here at. Maybe the audience doesn't realize that we have access to a little drop down of people that are listening today, and I see Maxine Volk is listening to our broadcast today, and I want to pass on a story Maxine told the other day when he and I were talking, that he got his first MiYO kit, and the dentist that he works with in the office, they had a patient coming in for a full upper and lower arch the next day at like 8 o'clock in the morning. He hadn't even started on the case yet, and the dentist was like, should we cancel?
That never happens.
No, never, ever, right? And Max, the dentist said to Maxime, should we cancel the patient? I mean, it's not going to be ready. Maxime said, talk about brave. He got his MiYO kit at 9 o'clock that morning. He figured, this is the only way I'm going to be able to get this done in time. He opened it up, and of course, he's an incredibly talented technician. He grabbed his MiYO kit and he said, done. Yeah, I was done by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The whole thing done. I showed it to the dentist. She was completely blown away, and we delivered the case the next day. I mean, that's unheard of.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk a little bit about more about the level of translucency of the monolithic zirconia material. So in the same way that, I love translucency, it's one of the things I've always loved when Empress came around and really revolutionized dental ceramics, and then the Emax lithium disilicate but you can also have too much translucency. And so I tend to shy away for my implant crowns from using the lithium disilicates, because typically we have restorations that maybe are 2 or 3 millimeters thick, and that brings down the value level of it. And then on that metal substructure, even if it's gold anodized or whatever, they tend to be too low in value.
Yeah.
When you start working with the MiYO and you think about the substructure that you're going to be applying it to, or monolithic prosthesis, it's probably counterintuitive for most people that you would say, look, give me a 3Y material that is not that translucent, and with the material you're able to control the translucency levels that you're after, the aesthetics, and yet still get the value levels of where you are. Because again, as you were saying, if I worked with a 4Y material or a 5Y material, and I pay the price of significantly lowering the strength, and for a single crown in the anterior, that's not going to make any difference. But for bridges, I want to have a 3Y or maybe a 4Y material if it's a shorter span. And with those 5Ys, we played around with it in our lab, is they're simply too low in value. So that's a really important factor in that.
Well, and that's especially true in lighter shades. And every ceramist knows, if you've ever tried to make a single central for a patient that was A1 or B1 or something like that, that most often where the restoration fails is the value is too low, even in layered ceramics. And years ago, when I was on the road teaching ceramic courses, it was one of the biggest challenges, is how do you make an A1 that's really translucent, like a natural tooth, a young natural tooth, but at the same time, you don't lose the value of the restoration. And the answer was always the same. You build up a lot of reflective quality using really bright opacious dentins and so on, and then you layer towards your final result. So the lesson being, start out with a value much higher than what you need and work your way down, because the opposite direction is much more difficult. So the same is true with MiYO. I mean, in fact, a lot of times we show samples of zirconia where it's not, I mean, it's white. It's not even pre-shaded. We haven't bothered to take the time to do any shading on it whatsoever. It's not something we typically recommend to somebody who hasn't, used the product and really gained some experience there. But what it does is it really kind of underscores exactly what you're talking about, is that controlling the value is kind of the first thing we deal with, and working our way down to the correct value, just like we do in normal layering ceramics, is the smarter choice.
So I see Christopher has a question about how many firings are typically required for that. Could you address that for let's say a 14 unit implant supported bridge, and then maybe for an anterior single crown or something like that, for like a single central?
Yeah, single central, we'll start there. That's easier. You're gonna, usually the color application, whatever, and I think, yeah, so normally it's 2 firings. So you'll put your MiYO color on, which establishes all your characterization, your translucency, whatever it is you want to see in the tooth, minus surface texture, you're going to establish with the MiYO color. And assuming you get that and you like what you have, then the next application is for the structure material, strictly for the purpose of maybe making some subtle alterations to shape, but predominantly to create the surface texture that you alluded to earlier, right? Because surface reflection and scatter is a critical component of matching natural tooth dentition. So usually for a single tooth, it's 2 firings and you're done. For a hybrid case, it's a sequencing issue, right? I mean, you're talking about potentially 12 to 14 units. You're talking about teeth and tissue. There's a lot of complexity there. Just the physical act of holding something that's so big and working across the entire restoration is a little bit overwhelming at times. So in a case like that, we will typically try to do the shading of the MiYO color of all the teeth first, and then fire that. And then if we like that, we'll do the color to the tissue. And then we'll put the MiYO structure on the teeth, and then we'll fire that, and then we'll put the MiYO structure on the tissue and fire that. So in theory, if you've been practiced in the material and you've got a good handle on how to move forward through it, you're looking at 4. Could you do it in less? Absolutely. If you had the wherewithal, you could put all your color on teeth and tissue in one application and fire, and you could put all your structure on in one application and fire. It's not how I would do it, but it's certainly possible.
So when you're doing that, let's say you had to do 4 firings. So the last one is structure, and then you did 3 with color on a big prosthesis. So do you lower the temperature, the sintering temperature a little bit, or I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of the first bait that you have on there, do you have to bring the temperature down a little bit as you go through those additional firings?
Yeah, so let's talk about the 2 different materials. So MiYO color, let's talk about that first, right? So in a normal layering scheme, you're always concerned about crown form, and you're concerned if I fire too many times, the ceramic will slump a little. I might lose a corner that used to be sharp. Now it's too rounded. Surface texture goes away. I mean, a lot of different things. In the MiYO system, with the first application, which is color, you're not worried about those things, right? Because your form is dictated by the underlying substructure, whether that's lithium disilicate or it's zirconia or whatever it might be. So the color has an incredibly wide range. You can go anywhere from around 700 degrees Celsius up to well over 800 degrees Celsius. The color won't dissipate, it won't run, it may be a little glossier, but other than that, it's very, very stable. So multiple firings, if you needed to do that with color, are not an issue. When you get to structure, that's really when it starts to act more like a layering material. So for example, if you put the structure on your teeth and you fire it and you really like the texture that you have there, and then you have to put the structure on the tissue, in general, you'll find maybe a little bit of softening to the texture of the teeth, but not much. And this is how the material has worked all along. But in recognition to the fact that, generally speaking, what we like to do is know that whatever the texture is that we impart onto the teeth is going to be there, and we can work around that in a very confident way. We actually developed, and it's actually a material that will be coming into the market here in the next month or two, a high temperature structure for teeth, with the idea being that, and when I say high temperature, it fires at 760 rather than the current structure, which is around 720. So the idea being at 760, you can put your structure on your teeth, have all the texture you want, get it exactly the way you want it, and then the structure for the tissue, which will remain at 720, gets fired at a 40 to 50 degree lower temperature. So that preserves not only the stability of the texture on the teeth, but the other thing it does is it gives you, in conjunction with the current structures, which fire around, it can be as low as 690 for that matter. It now gives you the option to have a correction material. So if you're using the higher fusing structures, you now, as your primary material, the lower fusing structures for teeth now become a really nice correction material. So you can refire at the lower temperature using structure and not have to worry about disturbing that original surface texture.
Okay.
So, one of the things, John, that we hear quite often, there's a lot of purists. I know, and for our audience, you're a fisherman, and as am I. I'm not. I don't discriminate about catching fish. I'll take a spinning rod and go deep sea fishing. I'll take a fly rod, and so I just like fishing in general. But I know for a lot of fishermen, fly fishing is it. They're purists, so they can't see any other way of catching fish. In our profession, layering tends to be the purist mentality, and I appreciate that, and I certainly understand it. I'd like to think that my early reputation was built on creating beautiful teeth from layered restorations, and I know there's a lot of other people in the world that are very skilled in that area as well. What would you say to them when they say there is no way to create natural looking restorations in monolithic? It's only possible through layering. You mentioned earlier, you're a skeptic. You saw, I think you saw before we actually came to, didn't you see James give a presentation before we came to the university?
I think I watched something on YouTube or something.
Okay. Yeah. And I remember the phone call. You said, Don, listen, I saw James. It was, what I saw was unbelievable. And so much so, I got to see it for myself. He goes, I believe, but I got to see it. And part of the fun of going to the University of Washington and spending those 4 days, not just with you, but with your students in the grad program. I mean, when we put some of those cases in their mouths, I just remember the students coming around and looking, and I'll let you describe the reaction, not only that you had, but that they had and that the patient had.
Yeah, and that, I mean, a lot of us had to pick our jaws up off the floor where people just couldn't believe it. And, it's a small world. So Ed McLaren, that was my graduate prosthodontics resident at UCLA, and then James went through his program, and whenever, a number of times when I saw Ed McLaren, he was raving about James' talent. So I was thinking, well, maybe a lot of this is just because how talented James is at building this up. But what was great was when we were in the clinic and we were trying these in, how everybody in there was gathering around and looking and going, damn, I mean, these just look so natural, so I try to be a good fly fisherman, but and my story was when I was at Tufts Dental School, we had to do all our own ceramics. I enjoyed doing it, and I was fairly good at it. But from the get-go, it was really challenging to have a dark metal substructure, opaque porcelain on that, and then always trying to tone down the restoration. And so in '84, when I finished my prosthodontics program and I started at UCLA, we started working with the Cirrus store and the Dicor systems. And, I was looking for ceramic systems that had substructure materials that were much closer to, let's say, dentin, and then you can characterize it. And that's kind of what I've been doing all these years with working with many of the major systems. I think we've done probably 12 clinical trials over the years. And at the same time, in my practice, I want artistry. In my Pacific Dental Institute, my private practice that Kevin was talking about, I had 1 or 2 in-house technicians. So it was important to me. It's expensive, to have talented people with their benefits and everything in there, but that's the only way, that's the level that I wanted to work with. And those technicians, like Kazu, were super talented, and we're kind of traditionalists, but we're working on the more translucent materials. But as I've been going along, I believe even more in the KISS principle. If I can get the results with simpler processes and just from materials properties, if I can have a monolithic zirconia crown or bridge on there, I'm going to have a stronger, much better longevity of my restoration. I don't have to worry about chipping, you know, where it's been cut back and characterized on the incisal edges. So to me, this is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, you know, where we are now with this material, you can achieve results that I would put against anybody in the world in terms of doing micro layering or layering powdered materials. I mean, I think that's where the material, the MiYO material has gotten us to. So I would defy these purists that want to do these buildups to really try the material out, you know, and do some experimentation with it. And I think you'll be convinced. And you know, we're a stubborn lot, and I think you can really see by working with the material that you can achieve world-class results with these materials in 200 or 300 microns thickness, you know.
So you asked earlier, John, where MiYO came from, how it got developed, and you know, what was the driving force behind it. So I kind of held off on answering that question until we got through some of the heavy lifting here.
Sure.
I think now is a really appropriate time because you know, it really doesn't it really doesn't matter what drove you to get there or how you got there unless you're getting the results. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective with everybody about what the results are. I know the first time you and I kind of met, I saw you on the podium talking about you know, some material from Ivoclar. I believe it was Empress at that time.
Sure.
I know you've been involved in aesthetic dentistry for a very long time, and I know you, being a ceramist yourself, that's always been a big part of your personality and your DNA. So, you know, I really respect that perspective and appreciate it. So you know, I think I would never want to be associated with something that didn't do what it was supposed to do. And to your point, you know, why go down this road? Because for me, and it's funny, I say this every time I get asked the question. You know, I stood on a podium 10 years ago and talked about monolithic zirconia as kind of this ugly duckling, and made reference to the fact that at that point in time, I had actually been let in the back door at several different companies who were in development of higher translucency zirconia materials. And what you realize pretty quickly is the trajectory of this material was going to be extraordinary. We were in the very early stages of zirconia development and what it could be. And you know, I had made the prediction at that point in time 10 years ago that this material, and I threw a picture of a Bruxier crown up, and you know what that looked like in the early days. And I said, this may not be very attractive aesthetically today, and there's a reason it's called Bruxier and not beautiful. But believe me, I've seen some pretty amazing stuff, and I think monolithic zirconia may be ugly today, but it has the potential to be extraordinary tomorrow. And of course, the trajectory of monolithic zirconia has been a pretty fast riser. And as a ceramist, as somebody who kind of hangs his hat on being able to, or at least trying to match natural tooth dentition, it became clear that all the tools that we had available to us really didn't fit into the monolithic box. You know, I mean, stain and glaze wasn't going to get it done. And I find it interesting today that in fact, yesterday, Kevin Mahan and I were talking about this. There are still people out there that say, this is nothing more than stain and glaze. Just you can make this yourself in the kitchen, you know? And yeah, you may be able to get some of the colors. There's no question about that. But to your point, there are aspects of what make it special, which were part of the development that I felt were requirements. You know, what you see is what you get. The ability to float color on color, the surface tension, which this material develops. I mean, take zirconia and make it polish it to a really high shine and take a stain or a glaze and try to paint it on there and see what happens. It just repels away, but that doesn't happen with MiYO. It doesn't happen with the in-sync glaze. And there's a reason for that. Those were all very important aspects of the development, because in the absence of that, if you don't have the right surface tension, if it doesn't adhere to the material that's highly polished, if you can't see what you're doing, if you can't build layer on top of layer, then you don't have MiYO. And so there's a pretty big difference, and people don't understand that when they say, "I'll just take and mix some glaze with some stain and you have MiYO." I say, good luck. I wish it had been that simple. We wouldn't have spent the time that we spent on it. But to your point, when you use it and you see it, then you begin to understand that how it's different. So yeah, to answer your question, it came out of a necessity that it became clear to me that monolithic, especially monolithic zirconia, was going to be something that was a very important part of our future, and we just didn't have the tools, to deal with it. We had stain and glaze, and we had layering materials, and there was nothing else available to us. So.
Yeah, one question I see from Zach on here, which I think is a great question, is how does MiYO hold up in the mouth compared to glazed surface such as the Emax ceramic glaze? And to your point that you were just discussing, this is not a stain and glaze material. So, again, going back in history, one of the problems with the Dicor material is there were several studies that came out that showed with the equivalent of 2 or 3 years of toothbrushing, you would actually wear off that coloring material.
Yep.
And so, again, this material is actually a ceramic on there. So it's going to hold up very well in the mouth. It will also, it's still smooth enough, like in all the clinical trials I've done over the years, you always have almost zero plaque accumulation on the ceramic surfaces. And so that's also true of the MiYO surface, all the way down to the gingiva is, you just go, damn, there's no plaque on here. It's only on the tooth structure. And so it's a very durable material. And we're collaborating now on using the OHSU oral wear simulator with 3-body wear, where we are looking at zirconia. And we know in all of our 2 or 3 studies, we've shown that the wear in vitro, at least, is equivalent to the wear of enamel against enamel. And that's primarily from the very fine particle size of the zirconia, let's say half a micron. So it has very polishable, very low wear characteristics against a natural tooth structure. And so preliminary wise, in some of the work we've done, the MiYO material also looks like it's low wear against the opposing surfaces. And, typically we really wouldn't put it on the occlusal surfaces. You might put it down in the central grooves or something like that if you wanted to characterize it. But the bottom line is, I think this is going to be just as durable as any ceramic material that's applied and sintered onto some kind of a substructure.
But John, you and I have had several discussions in this area, and you know my philosophy, and I guess I'll state it again here for the benefit of the audience. Is it's as you mentioned, it's a ceramic, and like any other ceramic, I hearken back to pictures I've seen of PFMs done that have been in the mouth for years, and you see wear into the ceramic itself. So ceramic is it's going to wear. Zirconia wears. I mean, all the materials we put in there wear. I mean, we we want that on some level because it's less destructive to the natural tooth. So the question really, if I've got 1.5 millimeters of layering material versus 0.2 of MiYO, I've never really, for me, the wear of the material is not the issue. It's, as you just alluded to, it's been more about the abrasiveness of the material. And maybe more importantly, realize that over time, any ceramic will wear away. So what's underneath it? And that's why I've been a huge advocate of polishing the zirconia prior to putting the MiYO on it, not on the non-functioning surfaces, but on the functioning surfaces. So I'll finish the zirconia completely, get it ready to be MiYO'd. I'll literally polish the occlusal or functioning aspects. That means lingual of anterior teeth, occlusal aspects of the posteriors, and then I'll apply the MiYO. And with the thought process being, yeah, okay, and maybe a couple of years if it wears away, I'm not exposing a unpolished zirconia material. I'm just transitioning from one to the next. So that's been the way I've looked at it. I don't know what your thoughts on that would be, but
yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable approach on there. But again, the question was about the durability in the mouth, and
yep.
Should be just fine for that, like any other type of ceramic material. I see one of my long lost classmates in junior high school, Bill Ragudo. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon. I am a duck, and I guess he was looking at my coffee mug, and he's asking if I'm a husky or a duck, and I'm always, to my dying day, I'm a duck here. So I know you're a big USC guy there. So
yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about, so you had this, you saw this need to develop something, and then kind of explain how you were able to guide your ceramic scientists at Jensen to then develop the MiYO material?
You mentioned chemical. So being a dental technician, one of the first pleas I had when I started my relationship, really got involved with Jensen was I had for a very long time been involved in the material development. As you know, John, I worked very closely with Ivoclar on the design ceramic. So it was something I had some experience and history with, and something I actually enjoyed quite a bit. So coming to Jensen and looking at what they had and where they wanted to go, having access to a ceramic manufacturing capability. First of all, it's a very, very rare commodity. I mean, there are 6 true dental ceramic manufacturing capabilities in the world, and so it's a very small club, and to have access to that was something that I certainly felt was important, and the president of the company, Dave Stein, felt the same way, as did many other people here, and it was a critical venture, and something that it certainly. We had a long-term vision for that, and MiYO may not have been clear at the time, but certainly we understood that opportunities like that would come, and we wanted to be in a position to be able to not only follow the trends, but maybe in the case of MiYO, set the trend. So, having access to that was kind of first and foremost, and so certainly it was. For me, it was like a kid in the candy store, right? You like to play around in the lab, and you like to goof around with stuff, and to have access to the capabilities that a company like Chemical had, and the people that were there. One of the primary people that was there from a ceramic engineering point of view was one of the principal developers of Emax for Ivoclar. So they were some very capable people there. And, so we came to them. It was really not so much hey, here's what we're going to do and here's what we need to do. Chemical had specialized in low fusing ceramics, so-called synthetic. They're really not synthetic. They're quartz and feldspar like everybody else, but they were really, really good at it. And they were making a lot of materials, private label for a lot of different companies. And they were actually they were extraordinarily good at making pastes. And believe it or not, without talking about names, they were making paste opaques and glazes for some of the best, most well-known ceramic companies and ceramic brands in the world. And because they were better at it than the other companies themselves. And so there was an inherent capability there that already existed. And so for me, it was the happy confluence, the happy, coming together of their capabilities, the trend towards monolithic, and this concept that was MiYO. And, all of these happy coincidences came together and fell into place. So there wasn't any real engineering. We were able to work very closely with some of the base concepts, base material concepts that they have. We certainly altered those, and we optimized them. And then, of course, how they're put together and how they're configured. And then some of the physical properties of the material, as I said, the surface tensions of the material, things like that where it doesn't repel on a polished surface, was something we had to noodle and get right. So yeah, I think it was funny when James and I showed up there the very first week. They kind of looked at us like, well, "What are you doing?" And I love to tell the story because we were sitting there, we need this and we need that, and it has to be like this. And while we were still far from optimized by the third day, we arrived with a fully cooked concept, and they were able to get us close enough in the ballpark that by the third day we were making some single centrals and putting mamelons and halos and everything, and showing it to them, and they were blown away by what we were accomplishing. And so it was fantastic to be able to lean on, as I said, it was a happy confluence of this idea, the experience that we had in years of layering ceramic, and what constitutes an optimal aesthetic outcome, and their technical expertise in materials and their ability to execute against the vision that we had, that gave us what we have today. So it was fun. I think part of it, and I asked you earlier, what would you say to people who think that only layered restorations can give you the aesthetic results? I think part of it, and going to Chemical and sitting down and, as I said, having a fully baked concept. The concept of MiYO is really the same as the concept of layered. There's really no difference. And where people struggle is they pick up MiYO and they try to use it like a stain and glaze rather than use it like a layering material. If you approach it like a layering material, certainly you can replace your stain and glaze and use MiYO as a stain and glaze, and you get a much better result. But the real length and breadth of MiYO is its ability to replicate natural teeth, or replicate, that depth and translucency that you would see in a layered restoration. And until you see it for yourself for the first time, it's hard to believe. I always tell this story because the very first cases that James did, that we did in advertisements, you could see it on social media. People say, that's Photoshopped. So it's been fun.
That's one thing I've always admired about you, Don, is, you can make world-class restorations, really beautiful, but I've always admired you're kind of a big thinker, a bit of a mad scientist, and we need people like you in the laboratory industry to develop these products. And, it was probably a pretty daunting assignment to the ceramic scientists when you said, this is what we want to do. And it probably didn't happen overnight until you finally got to the right consistencies of of the material and the working properties that you were after.
I would say it's still a work in progress, and we continue to try to perfect it. But yeah, you're right. We're at an hour, John, so I don't want to keep people on any longer. There's no hard stop for us, but I think this Yazoo asks a wonderful question, because I completely agree with you, Yazoo. His question is that one of the reasons that purists are shy away from MiYO is that's the stain only crown, or even I would expand that out to say monolithic crowns have historically been the low price leader in laboratories, right? I mean, 10 years ago when I stood on the podium talking about the Bruxier crown or the monolithic zirconia, it was a relatively inexpensive crown. It was a cheap crown. And, we fast forward to where we are today, and we look at what a monolithic zirconia can be with something like MiYO on it. And there's no reason, certainly absolutely no reason, for you to position that as a cheap restoration.
Oh, no way.
But you're a dentist. What would you tell the labs?
Well, I think the product, what I'm holding in my hand, kind of tells the story, right? So there's definitely a difference in, let's just say, a single crown that was monolithic zirconia, had MiYO applied to it, versus a $29.95 zirconia crown that is milled and has some stain thrown on it. I mean, there's no comparison, right? So I like this. What was one of the names you have for it is a liquid ceramic, right? So that kind of gets people to a different mental frame in there, in that that it is a ceramic and it's not just a stain on there. But I see probably the greatest appeal of this is for full arch zirconia restorations, which we all know how challenging those are. And, you can just get incredible natural looking results with this, with high strength, that the technician can know that if they're using a 3Y or 4Y material, it's got great strength. It should, do very well. If we look at, for example, Avi Bidra's work from University of Connecticut with Michael Tischler and his group of full arch zirconia monolithic bridges of less than 1% failure rate, with over 2,000 bridges. So now you've got that security of a high strength material, and with again what you see when you look at the restorations, when you open it up in the box from the laboratory and then trying it in the mouth, is just just wonderful aesthetics on there, that for me, or for many practices, dentists might use one lab for posterior restorations, and then another more expensive lab, more skilled lab for anterior restorations. And I think with this, the laboratory, again, somebody who maybe doesn't have 20 years of ceramic experience, they can make restorations that look like they're super skilled ceramists, just with the development of those skills. So, again, I think we need to emphasize that this is not a stain and glaze product that the laboratory is producing. This is, it takes skill and materials in order to get this. And so you have a superior product that, again, I'd put up against any, 8 powdered buildup restoration for it.
Yeah, and we've got a comment here from Mary, and she says it wonderfully. She said, when the crown disappears in the mouth, really most dentists and patients consider it a wonderful value. They don't know how long it took or how you made it. Mm-hmm. I always say doctors don't pay for process; they pay for outcomes. And I looked at monolithic zirconia for a long time, and it checks every box. I mean, fit is amazing, marginal integrity is great, durability is off the charts compared to layered restorations. The only box it never checked was aesthetics, and once you can check that box, and I think what we certainly are seeing is that MiYO does that. You're not selling an inferior restoration. You're not selling something that you should be ashamed of or you should discount in any way, shape, or form. And I know a lot of dentists that think of when they check the box for monolithic on the prescription, maybe thinking about what they were getting 10 years ago. But I think the laboratory today has to be able to just show the dentist, look, this is an incredible restoration. It's more structurally sound than anything we've ever been able to make. And the aesthetics are equal to or better in many cases than what we've been traditionally used to. So don't run away from that. And like I said, dentists are paying for results; they're not paying for process. So
that's right. Yeah, and I think that's a great statement by Mary, that the patients and the doctors don't know whether it took 6 hours or 15 minutes to produce. The results speak for themselves, So yeah, it is the outcomes that are the bottom line there.
Yeah. Well, John, thanks. It's been wonderful as always. Thank you for participating and sharing your knowledge with everybody. It's always fun for me.
Yeah. No, it's my great pleasure. I always enjoy talking with you, my friend, and I think this is a great format that we can discuss things like this, and we've been using a lot of Zoom at school for our classes and some international lectures, but this actually works real nice. I like the questions there that we can, just like in your lecture room, if somebody has a question, okay, we can discuss it. So this is a really, I think, wonderful format. So thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I'll thank you both because, Don, you've been a big part of this too, as well as Dr. Sorensen. And I know I speak for all of us when I say we really appreciate not only the dialogue that you just brought to this, but also the credibility that's behind that dialogue. I think there's a lot there. So thank you both so much. Hope you continue to stay safe, and we look forward to things opening back up slowly and carefully. But it's good to feel a little bit of that sunshine come back in and a little bit of hope in the world. So, so thanks. Hope we can do this again soon, and be well. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah, everybody be well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.